I took the job because rent doesn't care what things smell like. The ad said $40 an hour, night shift, must follow workplace guidelines. That should have made me pause. It didn't. Tuition sat like bricks on my desk, my bank app flashing red. At 9:48 p.m., I pushed through the bar's door and the bell coughed out a weak K-ling. Neon bled red across the bottles like an open wound. The place reeked, beer dried into wood, smoke baked into the walls. The counter felt tacky under my palm, like it was still sweating beer from 30 years ago. What the hell am I doing here? Oh right, $40 an hour. A guy my age straightened behind the bar, towel on his shoulder. You Eli? Yeah, Eli Carter. Marcus Lane. His handshake was cool, practiced. He sized me up, smirked. You look like the kind of guy who'd sit at table 7 first night. I frowned. You look like the kind of guy who makes up ghost stories to keep new hires awake. He grinned without denying it. The owner slid closer. Thin. Vest too neat, eyes that didn't quite land on you. Grady Holt. Smoke clung to him like it had never left. He didn't shake, just said guidelines, back room. The break room was barely a closet, a fridge humming too loud, a crooked table, and a sheet of rules taped to the wall, yellowed at the corners. Night shift rules. I skimmed. Keep at least one beer tap flowing between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. If all run dry, refill and hide in the cellar until the bell rings 3 times. Table 7 stays empty. If anyone sits there, do not serve them. Leave out the back. When the black phone rings, answer on the first ring. Do exactly what it says. Do not look into the bar mirror after midnight. If you do, wash and read the prayer under the sink. The rest were just as strange, covering every corner of the place like commandments for a religion no one admits to. My stomach knotted like I'd swallowed ice. This is a bar, not a church. Why does it feel like scripture? Beside the rules was a Polaroid, grand reopening, 1978, faded, nicotine yellow smiles, and Holt in the middle, hair darker, vest newer but the same face. Not similar. The same. Don't laugh it off, Marcus said. They're not for the daytime. He tossed me an apron. The rest of the night was drills, pouring, glass washer, till. Cellar door sticks, Marcus said. If it pushes back, don't push harder. Holt drifted behind us, never looking at the mirror. Once he muttered, don't lean on the glass, it leans back. At 10:57, I lined up shot glasses just to keep busy. Neon hummed. I glanced at the mirror, bottles, stools, Marcus twirling a rag, my own face. I turned away. In the mirror I hadn't yet, half a beat late, like a skipped frame. I forced myself to keep moving, washed my hands though they weren't dirty. The prayer under the sink was taped upside down. I mouthed it anyway, lips dry. By midnight, the mirror went flat, black as standing water. I didn't look at it again. Marcus tapped the counter 3 times, tack, 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 like the bar itself was keeping score. I told myself I'd get used to it, but the rules weren't waiting for me to adjust. They'd already turned toward me. The second night started the same way. Bell stuttering, neon bleeding red, the counter tacky under my palms. The bar smelled worse tonight, like wet ashtrays mashed with sweat off someone's shirt. Marcus was already behind the taps, rag in hand. He smirked. Didn't quit. I'll pay Holt later. I slid my apron on, reached for a glass and poured too fast. Foam spilled over my knuckles. My wallet sat open on the shelf, Mom's note peeking out. Fall tuition, $3,842. Don't forget. I snapped it shut. $40 an hour. Just keep your hands steady. Beer's not water, Marcus said, flicking the tap closed. His eyes crinkled like he wanted to joke, but his grip was white around the rag. Customers drifted in, the air thickened with body heat and the sting of chlorine from melting ice. Then Tommy pushed through the door, dragging the night in with him. He banged a coin until I slid him a pint. Kid? He grinned, foam clinging to his lip. Don't let your ass hit table 7, not once. You hear me? He laughed too long, no one else did. I kept glancing at table 7, the booth half drowned in shadow, The cracked vinyl almost seemed damp. That's when the phone rang. Not the cordless, the black rotary by the restroom. Each ring sliced sharper than the last, like it wanted inside my skull. Marcus froze. "Your turn." My chest squeezed. I picked it up. A man's voice scraped flat through static. "Wipe table 6, clockwise twice." Click. What'd it say? Marcus's rag stopped moving. I swallowed. "Table 6, twice, clockwise." He tapped the bar 3 times, tack, 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 and nodded. I did it. Empty booth, perfectly clean. One circle, then another, nothing. I straightened and froze. Across the floor, table 7 bore the wet outline of someone who'd just risen. Leather darkened in 2 pressed ovals, cold vapor curling above it. A smell hit me, like rust in rainwater. The glass on the next table cracked with a tick. I couldn't move. My breath clouded faint in the air, though the room wasn't cold. Marcus came up beside me, staring at the outline. "Tables don't seat themselves," he said quietly. "Except that one." His phone lit for a second. A girl's smile, hair dark in sunlight. "Anna." He locked it fast, jaw tight. Tommy just raised his pint, eyes glassy. "Bar talks back at night?" "Always has." By close, the outline had faded, but the cracked glass still waited, daring me to touch it. I didn't. Walking home, my hands still smelled like mildew rag and rust. The phone's hiss clung in my ear. And I knew this wasn't just a bar shift. This was obedience. By the 3rd night, I thought I had the taps figured out. Tilt the glass, slow pull, cut the head. Easy. Except sometime past midnight, the tap sputtered. Not the sloppy kind of sputter when you mishandle it, but dry. Air coughing through the line. I pulled harder, nothing but a gasp. "God damn it," Marcus said, storming over. He slapped my hand off the handle. "Rule number 1, Eli. You let the line die." "It's beer, not blood," I snapped. Foam dribbled weakly into the drain, like the last drops from a lung. His face tightened. "You think this is a joke?" I couldn't help it. I laughed. Sharp, brittle. "Yeah, I think this is a bar, not a church. I don't need commandments to pull taps. I need money for tuition." Marcus didn't laugh. He grabbed a flashlight, jerked his chin toward the cellar. "Then you better learn fast, because you just rang the wrong bell." We headed down the narrow stairs. The cellar air hit me like walking into a freezer. Wet stone, metallic chill that bit my teeth. Rows of kegs loomed, sweating condensation that puddled on the floor. Then one of them exhaled. Not the hiss of pressure, not normal. It sounded like breath dragged through a broken throat. The metal skin flexed inward, just a hair, then popped back out. I froze. "Did that?" "Don't say it," Marcus muttered. His hand shook on the valve wrench. "Just change the damn keg." I helped him wrestle the line, the chill sinking into my bones through the steel coupler. It felt alive under my grip, faintly pulsing, like a vein. My stomach churned. We got it switched, the line filled, beer running again upstairs. But when we climbed back up, the air felt heavier, like something had followed us halfway. I slid behind the bar, pretending normal, poured 2 pints, handed one to a trucker who never looked up from his phone. My hands shook so bad I nearly spilled. Then Marcus stopped dead, staring across the room. Table 7. The booth's chair had turned, not a full spin, just half angled toward the bar, like it wanted a better view. The vinyl seat glistened, damp, 2 oval patches darker than the rest, perfect impressions of thighs pressing down. I swear the air around it shimmered colder, faint vapor rising. I felt it too. From 20 feet away, a chill brushing the back of my neck, prickling my skin. The stink rolled with it. Sour leather, a sharp tang like old pennies rubbed raw. "No one sat there," I whispered. Marcus tapped the counter 3 times. Tack, tack, tack. The sound jumped in my teeth. Someone did. We stood frozen, listening. The bar's chatter had dimmed, voices muffled like under a blanket. Tommy snored over his pint. The jukebox hummed without playing. The chair creaked then, slow, like weight shifting invisible. My gut turned to ice. I backed up until the sink hit my spine. Marcus leaned close. Next time you think this place isn't a church, remember the pew that seats itself. I wanted to tell him to shut up, but I couldn't. My mouth was dry, throat stuck. The damp outline stayed until last call, gleaming under the neon, like something that refused to evaporate. When I locked up at dawn, I glanced back through the glass. Table 7 sat in shadow, chair still angled toward the bar, waiting. The jukebox never needed quarters. It squatted in the corner like some chrome altar to nicotine and bad memories. Marcus had told me once, if it ever plays by itself, you stop, you listen. Nothing else matters. So when Derek, the wannabe guitarist with hair in his eyes and whiskey on his breath, slammed a coin in and picked a track, Marcus's rag froze mid-wipe. Not that one, he barked. Derek laughed, strummed the air. Place is dead. Needs music. The machine clunked awake, gears grinding. Marcus slapped the counter so hard my pints sloshed. His eyes were on the clock, not on Derek. 2:22 a.m. From below the floor came a noise, steady, wet, like a pitcher pouring into a bottomless glass. The wood beneath my shoes vibrated faintly, as if something hollow was filling under the bar. I whispered, "Marcus." He didn't look at me. "Number, register." I ripped the drawer, found the scrap taped inside, dialed. The line hissed, voices layered over each other, whispers drowning whispers. One phrase pushed through, warped like magnetic tape stretched to breaking. "Don't go down. Don't shut it. Just wait." The jukebox cut Derek's choice mid-note and lurched into something else. Blue Moon. Syrupy and warped. That's when the bar froze. Forks hovered, a woman's laugh severed mid-sound. Derek's grin stuck open, eyes blinking, but body locked. The ceiling fan slowed until the blades groaned. Even dust shook loose, drifting like ash in the neon haze. My chest seized. I wanted to bolt for the door, but my legs were welded to the tacky floor. Sweat slid down my back, cold, and I swore the beat of my heart fell out of sync with the song. Marcus hissed, "Down. Stay behind the bar." We crouched. The jukebox crooned, dragging notes too long, syrup stretching into bone. In the mirror, Holt stood at the door. Not moving. Not breathing. Smoke rolled from his collar in a slow, perfect curl. His reflection was sharp, too sharp, cleaner than real glass should ever show. He watched, not smiling, not anything, just watching. I risked a glance at the door itself, empty. Only the mirror held him. The song stretched forever, every warped note pressing heavier, like air thick with ozone before lightning. My knees cramped, my teeth chattered in rhythm with the warped vinyl. And then silence. It slammed down so loud my ears rang. Forks clattered. Sentences picked up mid-word. People blinked, laughed, drank, like nothing had happened. Derek muttered about bad feedback and stumbled out. Marcus finally stood, knuckles white against the bar. "That was Blue Moon," I whispered. He nodded once. "Rule said stay behind the bar." We did. And if we hadn't? He tapped 3 times on the counter. Tack, 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 like he was trying to fix the beat of the world. The mirror still clung to Holt's afterimage, faint, grainy. Even as I wiped bottles, I felt his eyes on me, waiting for the next song. By the 5th night, I had started moving on autopilot. Pour, wipe, nod, repeat. The jukebox incident clung to me like smoke, but muscle memory dulled the edges. Or maybe I just wanted it dulled. The bar was quiet, only a handful of regulars. Neon buzzed faintly. Somewhere deep in the wood, pipes ticked, shifting old heat. I dragged the rag across the counter, the sour tang of stale beer rising fresh every time the cloth passed. The surface stuck to my skin like glue, releasing with a soft skirt. I told myself I wouldn't look into the mirror. Rule number 6, don't tempt it. But wiping down bottles forced me toward it anyway, angled reflections tugging at my eyes. I kept glancing without meaning to, my sleeve, Marcus's outline, the glowing rim of a pint. Harmless, almost. Then I caught it. Marcus, standing at the far end of the bar, polishing a glass. In the mirror he was grinning, wide, toothy, too bright. But at the bar, his face was stone. The glass shook in my hand. I dropped the rag, heart punching my ribs. "Marcus," I croaked, He looked over, puzzled. What? I didn't answer. Couldn't. His reflection was still smiling at me, lips peeling back slow, eyes hollow like glass marbles. I forced myself to move. The sink, the prayer. Rule number 6 said, if you look, wash and recite. Water roared hot over my hands. The metal basin smelled like old pennies and bleach. Steam fogged my wrists. My lips stumbled over the words taped upside down beneath the sink. A prayer I didn't believe, didn't even understand. But I mouthed it anyway, shaking, voice thin. When I looked up, the mirror rippled. Not a trick of steam, not my eyes. The whole surface moved, a slow gelatinous shiver, as if the glass was water in a breeze. My reflection blinked, and for a second it didn't blink with me. Instead it winked. A slow, deliberate closing of one eye. The corner of its mouth curling into a crooked smile. My stomach dropped. The air turned cold, sharp with the smell of wet metal and ozone. My skin prickled. Don't, Marcus said sharply. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the mirror, his rag frozen midair. I stumbled back, slamming into the beer taps. My reflection didn't stumble. It leaned closer instead, head cocked, grinning wide enough the cheeks split pale lines. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run, but my shoes stuck, soles tacky on the beer slick mat. Keep reading, Marcus hissed. His fingers tapped 3 beats on the bar. Tack, tack, tack. Fast, urgent. I stammered the prayer again, words tripping out like broken glass. The mirror shuddered once more. My reflection's grin faltered, smeared like paint in rain. The glass settled, flattening. Just a mirror again. I stood there gasping, my palms wet with sweat and scalded from the hot water. The rag lay where I dropped it, reeking of sour bleach and mildew. Marcus came over, set a hand heavy on my shoulder. He didn't meet my eyes. Never linger. The longer you look, the more it looks back. I nodded, throat tight. As I cleaned the last pint of the night, I dared one quick glance. The mirror was flat, harmless. But my stomach twisted anyway, because even flat glass can remember. And I swear, for the briefest flicker, its surface twitched like skin crawling under my gaze. By the 6th night, I hated how natural it felt. Pour, wipe, dodge the mirror, pretend the rules weren't scripture even as I mouthed them like prayers. The bell coughed again when Officer Ray came in. Uniform creased, badge sharp, radio clipped to his shoulder. He nodded at Marcus, ordered a soda instead of beer. I noticed how carefully he avoided looking toward the back corner. Table 7 sat in shadow, empty but not empty. Ray didn't take a booth. He stayed at the bar, forearm planted, eyes roaming, his badge glinted under neon. I caught its reflection in the back mirror, except I didn't. The badge was gone in the glass, just a blank patch of navy cloth where it should have been. My chest tightened. I blinked hard, checked again. Same. Badge in real life, no badge in reflection. Before I could say anything, the door opened again. A man shuffled in. Tall, shoulders hunched under a coat too heavy for the season. His face stayed low, brim shadowing his eyes. He didn't hesitate, didn't even scan the room. He walked straight to table 7 and sat down. Vinyl squealed under his weight. The sound scraped straight down my spine. I froze, rag dripping on my shoe. Marcus hissed, "Don't." His hand clenched the counter. 3 taps, fast, nervous, tack, tack, tack. But I couldn't just let a man sit there. Customers notice, Holt notices, the rules notice. I grabbed a coaster, forced myself to cross the floor. Each step felt like walking into a freezer. The air around table 7 was colder, metallic, smelling of wet stone. Sorry, sir," I said, voice too thin. "That table's reserved." The man lifted his head. His smile was wrong. Lips pale, stretched too wide, eyes flat as glass marbles. "Reserved," he echoed, like the word was a joke. Then he laughed, low and wet, and leaned back. I set the coaster down just to have something to do. My fingers left damp prints that spread dark across the vinyl. When I turned to walk back, I swore I heard the seat squeal again, like someone shifting closer. I didn't look. Behind the bar, Marcus's face was gray. He'd been tracing shapes and spilled beer with his fingertip. When I glanced down, I saw it. The letter A, crooked, written over and over until the condensation blurred. "You saw?" I whispered. He didn't answer, just wiped the coaster away with his palm, breathing sharp. I turned, forcing myself to check. The booth was empty. The man was gone. No footsteps, no bell, no door creak. Only the glass of beer I hadn't poured, sweating on the table, foam fizzing softly at the rim. I backed up until my calves hit the bar. "Marcus, the glass." He wouldn't look. "Don't touch it." I stared at the foam sliding down the side, drip after drip pattering onto the floor. Still fresh, still alive. In the mirror, Ray's badge remained absent. His reflection looked like a man stripped of authority. He caught me staring and gave a nod like he understood too much. I wiped my hands on my apron, though they wouldn't stop shaking. That glass kept fizzing, bubbles rising in beer no one had ordered, no one had lifted. When the night finally ended, the glass was still there, untouched. The foam hadn't died. I left it for Holt to find. By then, I knew the bar breathed, not just through the taps or the jukebox. It exhaled in the walls, in the hum of machines. But I still wasn't ready for the cooler. It started with a noise, a high, thin "rah" from the back corner where the old ice chest squatted. Not the normal drone of compressors. This was sharp, rising, like steam whistling out of a kettle, only colder. Fog curled from the edges of the lid. Not mist, but thick vapor, the kind that rolled out of morgue doors in horror movies, except this was real. The closer I walked, the more it bit into my nose with that ammonia sting. Old ice, freezer burn, bleach from a century of bad cleaning. "Leave it," Marcus said flat, but his eyes tracked me. I touched the lid. Stupid. Reflex. The metal burned my skin with cold, like dry ice pressed straight to the bone. I yelped, jerked back. Blisters bubbled white across my fingertips before my brain caught up. Marcus swore under his breath, grabbed my wrist. His own hand hovered inches from the chest, shaking. Out of order. That's the rule. I stumbled back, cradling my hand. "So unplug it." "Yeah." His voice cracked. We dragged it from the wall, cords stiff with frost. The plug resisted like it didn't want to leave the socket. When it came free, the chest groaned, a deep, wet sound that rattled my teeth. I slapped an out-of-order sign over the lid. Paper went damp immediately, ink bleeding blue. Silence. The fog thinned. I told myself that was it. Then tack, 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 tack from inside. 3 knocks. Hollow, patient, exactly the rhythm Marcus always tapped on the bar. My blood iced harder than my fingers. "Marcus." He was pale. "Do not answer it." I backed away. We left it there, marked and dead. Tried to. I poured a pint for Tommy, who'd wandered in, already grinning like the world owed him nothing. He smacked his coin on the bar, winked. "Beer tastes better cold," he joked, nodding toward the cooler. I forced a laugh. My hand stung. Marcus said nothing. When I turned again, Tommy was gone. Not walked out, not staggered to the bathroom. Gone. His stool still warm under my palm. The pint glass still sweating, foam still alive at the rim. "Tommy?" My voice cracked. No answer. On the bar, his coin lay waiting. Except when I picked it up, it froze my palm. Not normal cold. Bone deep, sucking heat out of me until my knuckles went white. I dropped it with a gasp. The metal clink rang too long, like it fell down a well. Marcus's eyes were locked on the cooler. A handprint bloomed across the lid. Inside the frost, pressed out from within, 5 fingers, palms splayed, larger than Tommy's, nails etched grooves in the condensation. We stood there until the fog swallowed it again. I pocketed the coin, though it burned like ice through the fabric. By closing, the chest was quiet, the bar pretending normal. But Tommy never came back. His stool sat empty, the pint still sweating, foam refusing to die. And in the silence between clinks of glass and hums of neon, I heard it again. Tack, tack, tack. From under the lid. Waiting for me to answer. By the 8th night, the bar felt heavier. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the missing. Tommy's stool stayed empty no matter how many drunks drifted in. His coin burned a circle in my pocket like it wanted out. Around midnight, the bell rattled and the 14th customer pushed in. I didn't count anymore, but Marcus did. His lips moved, keeping tally. When the man settled, Marcus jerked his chin at me. Mini keg, free pour. That was the rule. 14th got a gift. I hauled the keg onto the counter. The wood thunked under its weight, foam spitting through the spout. The room filled with that sour, yeasty fog, staler than it should have been, like the keg had been buried somewhere wet before arriving. People laughed, raised their pints. The neon hummed overhead, blue bleeding into red, painting everyone bruised. For a moment it felt almost normal, like a college party I couldn't afford anymore. Then the phone rang. The black rotary by the restroom. Not a normal ring, this one dragged, each burring, scraping metal, overlapping itself like a chorus out of sync. I froze. Marcus shook his head, but it was my turn again. I lifted the receiver. The sound nearly split me. Not one voice, dozens layered. Female, male, child, all pitched wrong, rising and dropping. Like furniture dragged across concrete, wrapped into words. Hide, cellar. 11 minutes. Click. The line went dead. My hand was shaking, slick with sweat. Marcus hissed, "We stay." "They said cellar," I croaked. He slammed a fist on the bar. "If we drop, who keeps them safe?" The crowd was laughing, oblivious. Beer foam clung to their lips like sea foam on rocks. I wanted to listen to him, I did. But the air was already wrong. Tables trembled faintly as if something was pacing underneath. Chairs scraped without hands on them, slow, deliberate. "No," I whispered, grabbing Marcus's sleeve. "We have to go." He resisted, knuckles white. For a second, I thought he'd hit me. Then his jaw cracked, and I dragged him anyway. We stumbled down into the cellar. The door slammed behind us, lock clicking from the outside. Pitch black, stone sweating. The cold sank into my chest, rattled in my bones. 11 minutes, I muttered. We waited out. Marcus sat breathing harsh. "If they die up there." "They won't," I lied. My teeth chattered with it. We counted the seconds in silence, broken only by the drip of water and the distant grind of pipes. My pulse filled my ears until I thought I'd pass out. Then quiet. We climbed back up, shoulder to shoulder. The bar looked the same, customers chatting, drinking, laughing. The keg half drained, glasses clinking. But at table 5, the floor was wet. Not beer. Dark liquid pooled wide beneath the booth, shimmering under neon. The smell hit first, iron, sharp enough to bite the tongue. Blood. I staggered closer. My shoes stuck to it, peeling with each step. The couple at the booth laughed mid-bite, fries dipping into ketchup like nothing was wrong. Their shoes were planted in it, splashes up their ankles, and they didn't notice. Marcus, my throat scraped. He just stared. His lips moved, but no sound came. The blood spread slow, tendrils reaching across the tiles. No source, no end, just more of it seeping. Alive. I tore my eyes away, forcing myself to pour drinks, to keep my hands moving. The patrons laughed. Someone belched. A song hummed low on the jukebox, not playing loud, just bleeding out the speakers like a hum under breath. Only I smelled it. Only I felt the sticky drag under my shoes. When last call finally came, the pool was gone. Tiles dry, patrons stumbling out like any other night. But I kept wiping my shoes, scrubbing, even though they looked clean. The smell clung anyway, and when I leaned on the bar, I saw Holt's reflection in the mirror behind me. He wasn't in the room, just in the glass, smoke curling, eyes locked on table 5. The next night, the air felt swollen like the bar was holding its breath. Maybe I was too. Marcus hadn't spoken much since the cellar. He'd scrubbed his hands raw, like he could wash out the smell of blood only he and I seemed to notice. Close to 2 a.m., the bell rattled once. A man stood in the doorway, arms hooked under a wooden crate. He didn't hesitate, didn't ask, just dragged it across the floor, boots scraping in slow, heavy arcs. The box left streaks. At first I thought it was spilled beer, but when the neon hit it, the liquid glowed amber, thick as syrup. It dripped in steady ticks, each drop bursting with a faint hiss when it hit the tile. The smell rolled up before him. Iron and rot. like rust scraped wet and mixed with cheap whiskey. He looked like Officer Ray. Same shoulders, same haircut under the cap. But the eyes stayed down, shadowed. He didn't acknowledge me. Didn't tip his chin to Marcus. Just hauled the box toward the back, toward the cellar door. Marcus stepped out from behind the bar. His jaw twitched, but his voice stayed steady. Deliveries don't come this late. The man kept moving. The crate banged the first step of the cellar, then the second. Each impact cracked wood deeper, like bones splitting. I panicked, remembered the rule. My hand shot to the doorframe, knuckles rapping 3 times. Tack, tack, tack. The stairwell answered. A dry clatter, like something falling between cracks. Then a small object bounced out, rolling to my boot. I bent, picked it up. A hair tie. Elastic frayed, threaded with cheap green beads, one missing, leaving a bare knot. I knew it wasn't mine. Marcus froze, he knew it. His eyes locked on the beads like they were teeth. His lips shaped a name without sound. Anna. He snatched it from my hand. His knuckles went white. His breathing broke apart, ragged and shallow. This was hers. The crate kept sliding. Each stair groaned under it, though the man's arms never strained. He didn't blink, didn't grunt. Just lowered step by step until the whole weight disappeared into the cellar dark. Marcus staggered forward like he meant to follow. I grabbed him. My fingers sank into his sleeve. Don't. It's bait. His chest heaved. His eyes were wild. I wanted to say something that mattered, something to anchor him. All I managed was, if you go down there, you won't come back. We both turned then, not to the stairs, toward the bar mirror. The man's reflection didn't exist. The crate bobbed there, yes, weight denting each step, but the carrier was gone. Neon outlined empty air where a body should have been. Just the box, floating itself downward. Marcus's lips moved against my ear, a whisper meant for prayer but not prayer. They took her. I didn't answer, couldn't. The smell of rust was thick enough to chew. The beads cut grooves into my palm where I'd clenched too tight. The box hit the last step without a sound. Silence stretched after. No door shut, no lock clicked, just absence. When I looked down, the floor where the liquid had dripped was dry. Tiles clean, no stain, as if the bar had licked it away. But the bead bracelet still weighed in Marcus's fist, and in the mirror, Holt leaned in the doorway, smoke pouring from his mouth like steam. Watching Marcus, watching the green beads, watching me fail to say we both just lost something we couldn't get back. The night after the crate, Marcus moved like a man with a hole punched through his center. He said little. He kept the hair tie, green beads, one missing, in his pocket. Thumb worrying the bare knot until the elastic squeaked. Derek showed up with his guitar like he owned a piece of the room. He tuned it without playing, strings whining soft. The crowd was thin, third shifters, a couple holding hands across sticky wood, 2 guys arguing about a game that wasn't on. Neon hummed low. The bar felt strung tight, like we were all waiting for something to snap. It snapped when the jukebox woke itself. No quarter, no one near it. It clunked, lights breathing once, twice, and rolled straight into a song I knew from every bar my dad ever dragged me through. House of the Rising Sun. Marcus's rag stopped mid-wipe. His mouth went bloodless. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. We both knew the rule. Blue moon meant hide. Love me tender meant lock the doors. House of the Rising Sun meant someone wouldn't survive the night. I wanted to cut power. I didn't move. The phone rang. The black rotary near the restrooms. First ring shaved the room of chatter. Second ring lodged behind my eyes. I picked up on the third because I couldn't bear a fourth. A child's voice, sweet, rom, metal echo under every word. The man at the counter must not leave. Keep refilling his pint. If he stands to go, break his glass. Click. I lowered the receiver slow, as if speed would make it more real. My hand shook so badly the cord knocked the wall. At the bar, a man I hadn't clocked before sat hunched over his pint. Ball cap, denim jacket, hands like roadwork, ordinary as a stop sign until you stared. His skin held a waxy sheen like a candle burned too hot and set again. Marcus caught my eye and shook his head tight. "No," it said. "I heard." He put the rag down. "We're not breaking a stranger's glass because a toy phone told us to." The jukebox spilled the second verse, notes stretched just a hair too long, like someone was pulling them by their tendons. Derek strummed a matching minor chord under his breath. It sounded like a funeral moving at the wrong speed. I poured, because my hands needed work. I topped the man's pint. He didn't look up. The foam slid down the side and beaded like sweat. He drank in long, slow swallows that didn't change his throat. Minutes dragged. The song crawled. The man's glass emptied. He stood. Everything in me lurched. Marcus said don't, but he said it to me, not to the man. I grabbed another pint and shoved it onto the bar. On the house. My voice broke. He reached for his coat instead, the move smooth, almost boneless. "Marcus," I said. He didn't answer. He stared at the hair tie in his fist, like he could strangle the world with it. The man turned to go. I threw the nearest pint as hard as my body would let me. It hit the counter and exploded. Glass and beer turning to shrapnel and spray. The crack punched the room. People flinched. The man stopped. Then he changed. Not all at once. First the eyes, going deep red like a cigarette coal, then deeper, not light but absence. The jaw loosened too far. Teeth showed, too many, too thin. The skin dragged tight like wet paper. He looked at me and my vision swam, edges bending, neon leaking. He blinked slow, as if deciding whether to eat or leave. He chose leave. He moved toward the door in a glide that didn't use joints. No footfalls. No bell cough when he went out, just absence where a body should be. For a second, the bar made no sound. Even the fan stuttered. Then the jukebox jumped to a final verse and quit mid-word, as if someone yanked the needle off with a fist. From the back office window, something watched. Tall, too tall, 7 feet, maybe more. It didn't stand right. Limbs wrong length, shoulders stitched uneven under a coat that didn't belong to any season. Its eyes caught the neon and threw it back in a color I don't know how to name. Where a mouth should be, there were seams, more than one, pressed shut like someone had cross-stitched silence into its face. It leaned forward. The room went cold the way hospitals go cold at 3 a.m. Derek saw it before I did. His guitar hit the floor. The chord he'd half-formed snapped into a metallic shriek as all 6 strings vibrated at once. He took one step back, like he'd remembered an appointment, and then he wasn't there. No door, no bell, just not there where a person had been. His guitar kept singing on the floor, strings humming a thin, endless note that made my molars ache. Marcus breathed, enforcer, like he was saying a prayer or a curse or both. The tall thing's head tilted. The seams shifted, as if it smiled without opening. Then it melted into the office darkness the way heat fades off asphalt. No one screamed, no one ran. They just reset, like after Blue Moon. A man dabbed at a beer stain that hadn't been there. The couple laughed at a joke, with no setup. The fan found its rhythm. The room pretended. I crouched and set Derek's guitar against a stool. The strings shivered when my fingers were inches away, as if my touch offended them. Out of habit, I glanced at the mirror. In the glass, Holt stood by the door, smoke slipping backward into the frame like water into a drain. His eyes weren't on me. They were on the space where the man had stood and on the stool where Derek no longer was. Counting, maybe. We closed late because no one seemed to know how to leave. When the last body drifted out, Marcus slid the bolt with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. He stepped outside to breathe. I followed, because being alone with the mirror felt worse than the night air. The lot lay slick under the security light, moths batting themselves stupid against the plastic cover. For a second I thought vandals had scraped the asphalt, long gouges raked in parallel across the top layer. The scratches formed a shape, not random, not letters from boredom. A 7. Carved across 3 parking spaces. White gravel showing through black like bone through skin. Marcus stared so long I thought he'd pass out. He tapped the rail without realizing. Tack, tack, tack. The sound died out in the open air. 7. He said, empty. The rule likes its numbers, I said, and hated my mouth for making a joke where none belonged. He didn't look at me. He looked at the hair tie in his palm as if it might answer. It didn't. Inside, the jukebox hummed to itself. With the power off, the night had made its choice, or maybe it just wrote it down where we could read it. The phone rang at 11:59. Not the slow mechanical chime of rotary. This time the ring hit like 2 voices arguing in a tin can, pitched wrong, scraping inside my teeth. I picked up because I always picked up. A hiss, then the layered voices, one male dry as coal dust, one female wet and doubled, spilling syllables out of sync. The girl who comes is not Anna. Do not sit her. Do not follow. Click. I hung up with my knuckles white. Marcus had stopped wiping. He was staring at the door, coaster crushed in his fist, ink bleeding through the cardboard. His lips moved like he was already arguing with someone who hadn't walked in yet. Midnight split the bar. The front door opened. She stepped in, same brown hair, cheap jacket, the laugh-line mouth I'd seen in Marcus's lock screen photo. For a moment, relief stung me. Then she walked wrong. Half-beat delayed, like her reflection in the mirror back on my first night. She didn't look at Marcus. She went straight to table 7. The vinyl squealed as she slid into the booth. Foam fizzed in glasses untouched. The jukebox clicked like it was swallowing coins, though no one had fed it. Marcus whispered, "Anna." I touched his arm. "It's not her." He shook me off like a dog shedding water. He walked to the edge of the table, hands shaking so bad he smeared condensation from an old pint. The thing wearing her face smiled. It began talking. Childhood stories. How she fell off a bike on Mulberry Street, the scar on her knee. But details slid sideways. It said Maple Street, not Mulberry. The scar was on the wrong leg. Her birthday shifted a week. The facts were close enough to slice. Marcus clutched the coaster until the pulp bled into his palm. "That's not you," he muttered. "You don't remember." She tilted her head like glass bending light. For a moment her hair fell away from her neck, and under the skin a line glowed faint, like a seam stitched shut. I couldn't breathe. The mirror behind the bar rippled. I risked a glance. The booth showed empty in glass. No girl, no Marcus. Just 2 pint glasses lowering themselves sip by sip, liquid vanishing as if drunk by an invisible throat. "Marcus," I hissed. "Back off." He didn't hear. He was lost in the cadence of her lies, each one peeling at his ribs. He laughed once. High, strangled, not the sound of someone amused. His fingers tapped coaster fragments into an A over and over like prayer beads. The imposter turned her gaze on me then. Her eyes weren't eyes. They had Anna's color, Anna's lashes, but the whites swirled faintly like milk in water. She winked, too slow, too mechanical. I felt my stomach turn inside out. The black phone rang again. But not on the wall, on the table, next to her hand. A black rotary where no phone should be, spinning itself. Marcus reached for it. I slammed his wrist down. The sound that came out of his throat was a broken thing. The phone stopped mid-ring. The imposter smiled wider. Her lips moved, but the sound wasn't words. It was the jukebox turning without power. The ice cooler's hiss, the cellar keg groan, all the bar's noises braided into a mouth. Then the pint glass on the table lowered itself to the last drop. Foam clung like veins, and the glass tipped empty, thudding gently against vinyl. I forced Marcus back. His eyes locked on hers like a moth to a bug zapper, already half burned. In the mirror, the booth sat bare. Table 7 empty, chair pushed in. Nothing living there at all. But in the room, the thing that wasn't Anna leaned closer, seam glowing faint, smile splitting too wide. I pulled Marcus away, coaster fragments scattering like teeth across the floor. He whispered one word, over and over, Like if he said it enough, she'd turn real. Anna, Anna, Anna. I didn't answer. The glass was still dripping on the floor, though no one had lifted it, and the mirror had already erased her. The phone rang again, but the sound was doubled, warped. Two voices stacked and scraping through the same throat, one wet, one dry. They spoke over each other, the words meshing like gears that didn't fit. One stays forever. One stays forever. The line cut, but the vibration didn't. It ran down my teeth into my jaw. Marcus's hands were bleeding from the coaster pulp. He looked like someone who just swallowed glass. His eyes were too bright, too wet, staring at the imposter still smiling at table 7. I said it before I thought it. We break them, all of them. He blinked, slow, then nodded. His shoulders shook once like he was laughing, but no sound came out. I grabbed the tap handle and yanked it back until foam sputtered and the line rattled dry. Rule 1, broken. The jukebox snapped alive before I touched it, crooning Blue Moon and House of the Rising Sun at once. Voices stretched, bleeding into each other like the phone's hiss. I kicked it hard. The casing dented. Record inside shrieked as if tearing. Rule 5, broken. Marcus turned to the mirror. His reflection was smiling back at him already. He stared anyway. His lips trembled, whispering a prayer he'd mocked 100 times. Then he stopped halfway and let his reflection move first. Rule 6, broken. The cellar door thudded open on its own. Cold fog belched up like a lung torn open. I didn't knock. I kicked the hatch wide. Rule 8, broken. The bar convulsed. Lights strobed. Neon bled from the tubes and dripped down the walls like liquid fire. Chairs toppled. Bottles rattled. Liquid foamed out of glasses without being touched. The imposter at table 7 tilted her head and grinned wider. Her seam split, skin parting at the jaw like wet stitching ripping. And behind her, in the ripple of air where the mirror should have shown her absence, a vortex opened, a black mouth pulling everything inward, sound, smoke, light. Tommy's cap rolled out of the fog and slapped wet against my shoe. The ledger on the bar flipped pages by itself, pen scrawling in frantic block letters. Paid. Paid. Ray appeared at the door, but not like a man. His uniform was still neat, his badge pinned, but he had no shadow. His mouth opened, and the voice that came out was the same doubled grind from the phone. One stays forever. He stepped toward us, and the vortex yanked him sideways. His face tore long before his body did. One blink, he was whole. The next, he was lines of chalk, erased by a wet hand. Shh! The imposter Anna screamed without sound. Her teeth clattered inside her widening mouth like loose dice. She clutched the table, fingernails digging trenches in vinyl. And then, her seams split full. She came apart down the middle, dissolving into smoke, sucked backward into the booth, into nothing. Marcus staggered. His lips still shaped her name. But when the smoke cleared, someone else was slumped in his arms. The real Anna, her eyes fluttered open. Dazed, alive. The vortex didn't close. It roared, dragging neon, bottles, chairs, glass, ripping sound itself into ribbons. The jukebox exploded, strings whipping like live wires. The mirror bent in waves, reflecting nothing but the black hole of table 7. Holt was standing at the bar. No, he was shrinking at the bar, his skin pulled tight, hair darkening, wrinkles evaporating. He straightened taller, younger. The scar across his jaw burned red, fresh, like a wound from decades ago. He inhaled smoke and exhaled flame. "You don't learn," he said. His voice was the bar itself, the jukebox, the phone, the cellar, every sound we'd obeyed and broken. The vortex took him too. His hands clawed for the bar top, fingernails screeching grooves in wood that smoked. His young face peeled away, split in light, and then Holt was gone. Sucked into the seat that had waited since the first night. The bar went silent. Neon still dripped down the walls, cooling like wax. Foam slid lazy off the bar. The mirror was cracked down the middle, nothing behind it but black. Anna shivered in Marcus's arms. He kept repeating her name, but softer now, like it might keep her anchored. I held Tommy's coin in my fist. The cold didn't fade. Not even through skin, through bone. The ledger snapped shut. I looked at the empty table 7. For a second, just a second, I thought I saw someone still sitting there, patient, waiting. I blinked. Empty booth, just vinyl, cracked and gleaming in neon drip. I didn't breathe. And then I wrote this down. Comment your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe to Dr. Noctis for more horror stories from the dark.